Filmmaking is more accessible now than it has ever been. And so whether you're looking for cameras or lights or computers, the prices come down so much. Unless you're looking for really high quality, ultra slow motion. It's still exceedingly expensive. Or is it? Yes, ultra high quality, ultra slow motion is still wildly expensive. FreeFly's been trying to get the price down, but that's still like 20 grand. So today we're not talking about cameras, we're gonna talk about the new Final Cut Pro 10.8 update, which now includes a machine learning AI enhanced slow motion feature. But the information in this video will be applicable whether you're a Premiere editor, a Resolve editor, or a whatever software editor. So in this video, I'm gonna go over some of the limitations of that AI enhanced slow motion, as well as showing you the best settings to use in order to make the most of that AI enhanced slow motion, and then also some tips on how to use that AI enhanced slow motion for non-slow motion purposes. And this is something I've used dozens of times over the last decade in wedding films and corporate movies, Kickstarter videos, all sorts of things. Basically anytime someone is talking to camera. Oh, and if you stick around till the end, I'll show you how we made that intro. Though I suspect you might already know how, and if you don't, you probably will by the end of this video because there was some jank. The new Final Cut Pro 10.8 update brings us their first real attempt at AI, machine learning generated slow motion. And so what this means is the software is going to analyze your footage and figure out what's happening and when, so that when you slow it down, it can generate new frames in between your existing ones. And they are by no means the first company, the first software to do this. This idea goes back to, I think, 2001 roughly with Revision Effects. They had an app called Twixtor. It's the first time I saw it. And since then you can find similar things in Premiere, After Effects. I'm mostly sure in Resolve as well, though I haven't used that one. And now in Final Cut as well. But let's get practical. We're over here. The first and most important thing when you're setting up your camera for the slow motion is your shutter speed. Now in film, typically you want to keep your shutter speed at double your frame rate. So a 24 frames a second shot is going to require a 48th of a second shutter speed, or 50th if that's all your camera allows. So if what you're looking for is to simulate 500 frames per second, then you're going to want to set your shutter speed to 1/1000th of a second. The reason for this is that the software needs really sharp frames in order to understand what's going on. If your subject is hidden in a bunch of motion blur, then the results aren't going to look very good because the software can't figure out what's what. The next thing you're going to want to keep in mind when it comes to getting your settings right is the frame rate that you choose to shoot in, because in order for the software to work, it's going to need to have some type of persistence of motion between the frames. It needs to understand where one thing is and where it's going. And if there's too much motion between frames, there's no real way for the software to understand which one is which one and what needs to be in between the two.
Can you try to get me with me?
Can you come spray me with a hose? So if, for example, I were to be sprayed with this hose in 24 frames a second, there's no real way for the software, even with super high shutter speeds, to understand which water droplet becomes which water droplet and then to create those frames in between. If your camera or phone can shoot 60 frames a second, that's going to look a little bit better. And if it can shoot 120 frames a second, it's going to look even better. And I think shooting 240 frames a second, we might almost be able to freeze time, or at least some of the water drops. So keep in mind that depending on the speed of the object that you're hoping to slow down, you're going to choose a different frame rate. 24 frames a second might do great to slow down someone waving or smiling or laughing, whereas somebody sprinting or shooting a Nerf gun is going to require higher frame rates in order to make sure the software has a persistent motion between frames. Maybe. Today's video was helped made possible by Artlist, which, if you don't know, is a music subscription platform, or at least that's how they started back in, I don't know, 2016 or 17. That's at least when I started paying for their services, and I've been using them ever since, and they have saved me bucket loads of money on music licensing. They also have a lot more than just music licensing now, which you can look at on their website. But I want to talk about something they just launched this past week called AI voiceover. And when I tell you it blew me away, I tell you the truth.
And I'm always telling you the truth. Why wouldn't I?
All you need to do is type your script or single sentence that you want voiced over, and it spits out almost instantly an incredible sounding voiceover.
But it doesn't stop there.
Not only are there different voices for you to choose from, but it also gives you little sliders, like a style enhancement slider. So these are gonna let you change the emotional range of that voiceover. You can also have it regenerate with a slider that changes how similar it was to the last one generated.
But it doesn't stop there. But it doesn't stop there. But it doesn't stop there. But it doesn't stop there.
So that you can try and get different inflection points on different words. And I think this is going to be huge for all sorts of different types of video producers, but specifically for video creators like me, and I know most of the people who watch my videos, this is a game changer because you can go from idea to finished product so much faster than ever before. So thank you so much to Artlist for sponsoring this video, but more importantly, thank you for making a service that I love, something that I can actually use in my day-to-day personal and corporate videos. I love you more than you'll ever know. Let's dive into those practical applications. The first being that non-slow motion application, the one that I've used for my entire career. And the second, we'll talk briefly about the intro. Let's imagine you had just filmed a wedding and the grandfather of the bride just gave this really emotional speech. And there's this one closing sentence you really want to use, more than you'll ever know. But right at the end of that sentence, Grandpa snapped. So for the edit, you have two options. You can either hide the very end of that sentence with some B-roll or something like that, maybe the grandpa hugging the couple at the end. But what I've always found most impactful is that when you're delivering that final emotional line, you really want to include the emotional weight of the footage of the speaker to close out that section. What you can do is you can take the last couple frames of him talking right before the sneeze was initiated, and at least in my hotkeys, you hit Shift N, it's going to create a new speed ramp section. And just for that section, we can essentially slow out just those few frames to sometimes as slow as 3 or 4%. Make sure you're not also affecting the audio there. You can essentially take just the moments where his mouth is closing or where his eyes look up, and you slow that down as if the sneeze never happened. I love you more than you'll ever know. Now, you don't want to push this too far, but I do find it gives you just enough space before maybe jumping back into the montage or the B-roll to make it feel natural. So give this a shot next time you want to take a sentence in the middle of someone's speech and make it feel like the closer. Works really well sometimes. All right, now let's have a look at this intro. This is my current timeline, but you'll notice it's mostly just sound effects, music, some adjustment layers, which are kind of the zooming in and zooming out, and then one track called Intro 6. Now, the reason I did this is because there's a lot of layers going on in here, as well as some adjustment layers that add faux motion blur back into the footage, and that can just really bog down your edit. So I'll often take some of these more complex sections, I'll export them as ProRes, and then start a new timeline just with that. Open up just the intro piece here, and you'll notice there's a lot more layers. Some of them are disabled. Looking at the raw clips here, it's a lot more obvious what's going on. I've got Christoph over on the right with a light stand and an apple on top of it. And Christoph will throw me that apple. I'll catch it. I'll be delivering my lines, sit down, and I throw the apple in real time, hoping to get it close enough to the final apple. Then after getting this right, we make sure to pull everything out of frame in order to get a clean plate. So this is going to allow us to mask things out of that other shot and replace it with what would have been behind them. So using a mix of that clean plate and various layers of masked footage from that original clip, I'm able to adjust the speed of different elements in the frame independently and then mash them all together as if it was one frame from the beginning. Finally, once I had the speed ramp on the apple the way I wanted it, we rotoscoped it so that it could be its own separate layer. And then I could keyframe the position of that apple to land as close to the apple on the light stand was as possible. A surprisingly simple, though not necessarily easy or quick process to pull off something that I think is pretty neat. Unfortunately, the rotoscoping of the apple had some glitchy errors at the very end of it before I catch it. And that happened because I have a pretty distracting background. So the edges of the apple aren't always identical, especially with reflections. And the rotoscoping just had a little bit of a problem there. So if I were to do this again, I would try and make sure that the background behind the object that's floating stays a lot more consistent. If you shot this on just a white wall, the rotoscope would have no problem at all tracking that apple. So there you have it. That's how I use AI slow motion in my day-to-day life. Sometimes it's for creative videos like this, and sometimes it's more practical applications like this. Oh, and shout out to Artlist for being a fantastic service that I've loved for many, many years, as well as a sponsor of the channel. So check the link down in the description, go find out more. And seriously, you've got to try this AI voiceover. Very, very cool. Bye-bye now. You're great. Maybe, who knows?